Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of the podcast. I'm Rob. I get to host today. I get to oversee our young adult ministry here at Black Rock Church, and I'm here with two friends today. So many of you know Kevin from our other podcast. He oversees Next Gen Ministries here. And I'm also here with our friend Heather, who is the assistant director of our young adults and a super awesome person. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob.
A big debut.
Woohoo!
We're glad to have you.
This is awesome.
I'm glad to be here.
Yes. So for those of you that weren't here this past Sunday night, we started a series called Love by Design. It's so awesome. You can check out that message on YouTube or wherever you watch or view content. And the basis of this past week was that love at its foundation is always self-giving, at least from a biblical definition and perspective. What we see happen in both stories of the Old Testament and New Testament combined into one story throughout the scripture is that love is always self-giving at its foundation. So we wanted to continue that conversation today, but we're doing a different podcast. We are doing a podcast today on singleness, the gift that nobody wants. Okay? So we're going to be talking about singleness a bit today. We're going to, I had a different name in mind as well at one point for this. I can't remember it now, but I'm glad that we're going with this name.
This is a good name.
It's a good
name, right? We've all been single at one point in our lives, so I want to address two elephants in the room. One, Kevin and I are married guys, but we've been single before, and half of my adult life has been single. The other thing as well is you might be like, well, what do they have to offer about singleness? Well, most of our marriage advice that we get in the scriptures are from two single guys, being Jesus and Paul. So I think that we'll be able to contribute a bit, but I also have Heather here for a fresh perspective. Heather, you're one of the healthiest single people I know. I think you're rocking out this gift really well. And I think that you just have so much valuable information to offer us. Now, as we get into this, I just wanted to open with setting the scene because there is an entire chapter in the Bible dedicated to singleness. I actually have it ready. In this letter called 1 Corinthians, Paul kind of stops midway into the letter and he starts addressing and answering some questions that had been sent to him. And the questions were all about love and marriage and singleness and sex within marriage, etc. And the church is asking him these questions, and they're asking because Jesus, who's the rabbi that they're following, was a single guy. So they're asking, in light of all that, should we even get married at all? And Paul's answer is surprising. He writes, I wish that all of you were as I am, which is single, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, singleness, another has that gift, which is marriage. So to Paul, marriage is a gift and singleness is a gift. Now for us, you may want the gift but not have the gift. You may have the gift but not want the gift. You may have the gift for a time but not forever. Or you may be widowed or divorced and get the gift later in life. But what is very interesting and important to note is that the Bible calls it a gift. The Greek word can also be translated a blessing. Yet aggravation arises when our personal experience does not always reach the scriptural testimony. So Heather, I just want to go right in. We love being authentic and real always. One of the big things that we say here at Sanctuary, one of our core values is we get close. And we believe that one of the ways we're doing that is by being authentic with each other. So we're just opening up the conversation. And I want to ask you, what has your experience as a single person been like in the church?
Well, I mean, you're talking about like Paul saying that both are a gift, both singleness and marriage. But I feel like in the church, there is a pressure to be married, to get married, and that the church does glorify the gift of marriage over the gift of singleness. That's definitely been, my experience in it. And as someone who's, in my mid-20s, I do feel like sometimes it makes me feel like either I'm lacking something or I'm missing out on something. And I feel like maybe not directly in our community here at Sanctuary, but in the general like Christian church culture,
Sure.
like there is that pressure, and you see it, I mean, on social media all the time. And people, you go to like, I mean, we just had Christmas. People are always
Right.
asking like, what's your next job? What are you working towards? Like, when are you going to get married? Are you dating anybody? Like, these
Sure.
our society is just always pushing us towards what's next. And I feel like, I mean, when you look at Jesus's life, he was always content where he was at. He was never like, what's the next life stage? What's it, you know? So I feel like there is like this hurriedness to it. But yeah.
So even like, would you say, Heather, that when you're around friends and family or other church people, when they're asking about your life, that's almost like an inevitable question that kind of comes up?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And it does make you feel like, if I'm not married yet, then there must be something that's wrong with me. Or there must be something that I need to work on so that I can like convince God that I'm worthy of marriage and ready for marriage, you know? And like, if I feel like there is like this, I've heard it talking with friends and stuff, like, there's this like, if I just like pay off my loans, if I just serve every week, if I just overcome all the sin in my life, then I'll be ready for marriage. But like, the fact of the matter is, we can't do that. We can never be like, you know, good enough to like earn something like that. Just like our relationship with Jesus. Yeah. We can't earn that love. It's just a gift.
You know, and I think maybe that the question that you're talking about, that you've been asked, is the fruit of a greater root. So here's what I mean by that. The question of, when are you going to start dating? Are you dating anyone? When are you going to get married? Etc. The root of that is a discontentment with my present situation.
Yeah.
My discontentment with whatever life stage I'm in right now. Because I know that, and I want to talk about that in just a second. So get ready to answer the question on like, how do you grow contentment when you're single?
Yeah.
But I know that, Kevin, you can probably add into this as well. I know when I started dating, it was, when are you going to propose? Yeah. When I got engaged, it's, when is the wedding? Yeah. When I was married, immediately, I hadn't even been married a week yet. It's, when are you going to start having kids?
Yeah.
And you have one kid, and it's, when are you going to have another kid? And I have 2 kids, and I'm like, how many kids do you want me to have? Like, oh my goodness. So anyway, there's this always, what's next for you? What's next? Like, and not enjoying wherever God has us presently right now. So Heather, I know that I mentioned earlier that singleness is a gift, but the reality is, and I've been there as well at points where it's a gift, but you might not want it. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily easy. And for many people, singleness is a challenge. So how are you able to build contentment in a healthy way in singleness? What has that looked like for you? Or maybe, Kevin, even if you want to just jump in on the overall principle of contentment in the present, that would be really helpful.
Well, I think like you, and Heather, you can speak to this too, but I think part of it is that because when you were talking about love by design, God did design marriage, family, having kids, things like that, but he also designed singleness. Like that was there. But I think in the church culture especially, there is this assumption that the pathway we're all on is to, as we grow, find the right person, get married, have kids. And so when you're starting with this underlying assumption that God's plan for you and for me and for Heather and for anyone is relatively exactly the same, then there is this culture of assumption that goes, that's the next step, whatever the next step is. So it's always pressure. You know, are you interested in anyone? Have you gone on a date? You know, then you go on 2 dates. It's like, where do you think this is going? You know, right?
I don't know.
We're
still figuring out. 2 dates.
It's exactly. I don't even know her middle name. What are you talking about? Like, that inherently there's this pressure with that. And how do you handle that pressure? Yeah. For some people, the pressure is to move it too fast. For other people, it's to run away from it or whatever it is. But whatever it is there's that part of it is that assumption that God's plan for you is the same for me and for everybody. And that's a lot of pressure for anyone to live with in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that pressure, for me, I've experienced it turning into like I mentioned before, like that feeling of lacking and what am I lacking, and feeling lonely or discouraged. But I think that when you it's all about perspective, right? I mean, everything's about the way you view things. And so I think if you change your perspective from singleness being something that is despised because that's a lie that we've been fed or something that we just need to like push through, to it being something that is full of potential, then you're able to maximize all that God wants to do in you as a single person. And there is a lot that he wants to do. And I know that like even when I'm struggling with those negative emotions, because they do come, it's not like you're always
one and done.
Okay, I'm woke up, I'm glad, I'm happy, I'm a happy single person. Like that doesn't happen. But I do feel that if you ask in those moments, ask the Lord to be what you need, he wants to be what you need. Cool. And so if you're needing, a friend or encouragement or a listening ear or something, like he's faithful in those moments because he wants to be that for you, which is wonderful. And then you're able to like grow content with it and grow in your relationship with the Lord, which ultimately is what we're here for, right? Like before you were here to be a husband, before you were here to be a husband, before I'm here to be a wife, we're here to be a child of God. And that's just our first and foremost calling in life. And that's the case whether you remain single or if you end up getting married one day, that's still like our ultimate calling.
Well, that's really good. I'm loving what you two are saying so far. I want to maybe take this a little bit of a different direction, but potentially building on what you just said on the end goal here, regardless of your relationship status, is we want to become more like Jesus. Yeah. And whether you're from a faith background or not, we believe that because we believe that Jesus came to give life and life abundantly and fully. And that when you walk in step with the example that he has given, that you will experience the abundance of life that he has fully offered to us. So we talked about love and the foundation of it being one that is self-giving. What does that look like in the context of singleness? I'm wondering if either of you have some practical tips or thoughts on this. What does love look like as self-giving in the season or in a life of singleness?
I mean, do you
go
have
for it.
Something to say?
No.
Whether you're married or not, some of us are married, some of us aren't, but no matter your relationship status, we're all called to love people. That's our second call after loving God is loving people. And so in 1 Corinthians, like Rob, you were talking about earlier, Paul talks about someone who's single, greatest concern being pleasing the Lord, and someone who's married, their greatest concern is someone else and the Lord, and their interests are divided, is what he says. And so like one thing that single people have that married people don't is time. I think that one of the gifts of singleness is the time that we have.
That's good.
And we do have this huge opportunity for more relationships. Not that you need to have, a million friends, but you do have the time to spend growing your relationships with your friends and with your family and sacrificing your time and your talents and resources and everything to more people.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely true. And just speaking from personal experience, as an extroverted person, there's some times where I can miss that. Like I almost miss that gift sometimes. When I was single, and I've always been extroverted, I was out without exaggeration like 8 out of 7 nights a week. So that was my experience. I'm without exaggeration, 8 out of 7 nights a week, right? now, not only am I married, but also having 2 kids, that looks more like, hey, a social life for me is 2 out of 7 nights a week. One of those being Sunday nights at Sanctuary, and another like if I plan my weeks accordingly, I can have a social event happen with my friends. Hannah and I go back and forth on switching who's on this week, who's off that week. So, and it's not because I don't like my friends. I love my friends. I love being with them. Every moment that I have with them, I want to maximize and treasure. But the reality is, as you mentioned, I'm serving the Lord, but also my secondary way of really serving the Lord, what that looks like for me now is serving my family and giving my time and attention and energy to my wife and to my kids while I have them under my roof. And that's honestly probably the best gift that I can present to the world now. Anyway, sorry, this is not about marriage. I'm just getting excited for this Sunday where we're talking about that.
Yes.
I liked what you had to say. Kim, were you going to say
yeah,
something?
well, with that too, I love, Heather, what you're saying about that, like the time factor. We still fill up our time with a lot of stuff, yeah, especially, in Fairfield County, tri-state New York, like, how much of it do you guys think is also, or Heather, you can speak to this, there is time, but there's an energy. Relationships take energy. They not only take time, but they take relational energy from us.
Yeah.
And like what you're saying, Rob, is sometimes when our energy has to be poured out primarily into these relationships that we've made a covenant commitment to,
Sure.
before God and before everybody else.
Right.
Like, we have to invest our energy there. Like, yeah, speak to that, like where the energy, comes and goes from in singleness.
One thing actually John Mark Comer talks about in
Loveology,
was how like there is more. Singleness doesn't mean you have less responsibility. You have, I wouldn't say more, but you have, or maybe at times more responsibility. Sure. It doesn't mean that you can just sit home on your couch every night and not be social, or that you can waste all your money going and doing whatever you want because you're free with your finances and vacations and whatever. But it does require energy. And I'm introverted, so it definitely is harder for me.
Your best friend is your cat.
My best
Shout
friend
out
is my
to
cat.
Raven.
Woohoo!
Raven, thank you for watching this.
Yes. But I personally, I love how I'm able to serve here at student ministry, which requires being out on a weeknight, late at night. Before Corona, we were able to go out in community and spend nights getting dinner together.
Good old days at Local Monday nights.
Local Monday nights. Shout out to Local. But I didn't have to think twice about it. You could really intentionally grow your friendships when you're single, and I can have a game night any night I want without asking my spouse if they feel extroverted that night or something.
Not just that, finding a babysitter.
Or finding a babysitter. Yeah, see, it goes
time
on.
Constraints.
The list goes on.
How much do we want to pay? Yeah. No, that's really good. Heather, you are starting to get to something that I just want to put out there. You're talking about different things that you can do in singleness. How about we just call it what it is? How can you maximize singleness? How can you maximize, because I think that you do this really well. I think that it would be helpful if you talk about some of these things. And also, as you're saying these things, I'm also learning stuff as a married person. Like, there are principles that you were saying that apply to anyone, regardless of relationship status. So I think that one of the things I'm hearing that applies to every single person is be intentional with your time. Like, steward the days well is also something that Paul gets to in 1 Corinthians is, hey, the time is short. Like, steward your life well. Can you talk about maximizing singleness?
I think that one of the greatest tragedies that can come from singleness is you missing out on the opportunities that God is putting before you in this time solely because you are stuck on wanting to be somewhere else. when God has you here. And I think it's so important for us to be faithful with the relationships and everything that God has with us right now. And then maybe one day he will entrust us with more, which a marriage is a big, what's the word? Just not responsibility, but
It
it
is.
is. It requires
It's a gift,
a lot,
but it's
and it's a
responsibility.
gift, but it takes a lot. And so I think that being faithful in your singleness will pay off in marriage, and it will pay off should you never get married.
Totally.
And so I think that like one of the most important things is that we should be constantly asking the Lord what he wants to teach you and how he wants you to grow. I think that like one of the things you can do is, instead of asking like, when am I going to get married, ask, who am I becoming?
Yeah.
And to like focus
Write
your
that
efforts
down.
Yeah,
Pull your
Heather,
car
you need to say that
over.
again. Say
Pull
that
your
again.
car
That was
over.
good. That was
Put it
good.
in park.
Yeah.
Write it down. Meditate on it for the next 50 years.
instead of asking, who am I going to get married to and when am I going to get married, you should be asking, who am I becoming? And to focus all your effort and energy around becoming someone who reflects the image of Jesus more.
Totally.
Maybe he wants to teach you to be faithful with the friendships that he's given you, and teach you to be a better friend, a good encourager, a good listener. Maybe he wants to teach you to be more selfless with your time, by serving and giving. And maybe he wants to teach you to be a better communicator, because I've never been married, but I have heard that communication is pretty key to any
Yeah.
relationship.
To every relationship. That's
Any
right.
relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
And also I think that this is also one thing from John Mark Comer's book,
Sure.
Loveology, is the importance of having and knowing the personal mission and personal calling that God's put on your life, because it's also would be, a tragedy to get married and then not know the mission that you're on together. So
A project
and
or
being
a vision
aligned,
that
a
we're working
project,
towards together. Sure.
but it's also, again, if you don't get married, that's still something that's super important. And I feel like I should just say, like, being single isn't like, oh, life is, I mean, it can be boring and lonely at times. I know our generation feels that. But it can also be super fun. Like, there are so many opportunities, and like we talked about earlier, all the fun, the time that we have, and the ways that we can grow in our friendships. It can be fun. I can go on vacations with my friends and grow intentionally with them. And so, yeah, I don't think viewing it as something that's to be like to dread is just taking away from the gift that singleness can be, if you like allow it to. Yeah.
Cool. No, great stuff. Kevin,
That's
anything
awesome.
to add?
There's so much to add.
I know, right?
But this is so cool. And I'm glad that we're having a chance to talk about it, because often when this stuff gets talked about in church circles, it's either, there is that inherent underlying implicit and explicit pressure to get out of singleness. So we don't often talk about, hey, what are the God, if love is by design, what does God have for love within the gift of singleness? Not while you're waiting around on the JV team,
Right.
which is often how it gets presented or felt,
Right.
or things of that nature. Where to go, no, this is part of God's grand design, and that love can be maximized, to use your phrase, in singleness differently than it can in marriage. And I think the kingdom fruit that sometimes can come out of the gift of singleness, not just for the people you serve, but even for yourself, is unique within singleness. And I think this is good, because at least when we're talking about stuff like this, it can also be celebrated as part of the normal, whatever normal looks like, whatever, as part of the normal of
anymore.
what the Bible describes as part of the gift.
Totally.
That, like we said, in our culture, especially in American 21st century church culture, marriage is the norm. The
Right.
problem is that's not even true because we're still 50% divorce rate within the church.
Flip a coin.
Yeah. So either singleness, like you mentioned, being single again, and what do you do with that? That's a whole other topic that we talk about.
Right.
But these things that, like you're talking about, Heather, that God can not only use, but can be celebrated as part of our kingdom life and goal of knowing Jesus and making him known, loving God, loving people. This is awesome that we're at least scratching the surface
Sure.
of a huge topic that
Yeah.
we need to learn how to not just be the elephant in the room or just talk through, or, oh, by the way, we're doing a series on relationships, we should mention this. They go, no, this should be celebrated
Yeah.
in
Right.
a unique way.
And do a podcast on it.
Absolutely.
Where we
Oh,
go
yeah.
deeper.
Yeah.
I know we're probably over time, but I absolutely feel like we need to mention just a couple things and just go a tiny bit deeper before I close it out with one closing thought. The most frequently asked question that we get when we do series like this, and even in this series, is, I am single and lonely.
Yeah.
How do we combat loneliness in general? I mean, it's going to look different for you as a single person
Right.
than me as a married person, but I can... anyway, I won't get into it right now. Right now, I want you to answer.
Yes, we're going
that
to talk more
question.
about marriage.
Yeah, we'll talk
coming
more
up,
about
but-
marriage this Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like our generation struggles with loneliness, maybe more than the preceding generations. But I think that we can think that the singleness is the cause of our loneliness and that that's the problem, and that getting married will solve that, which it doesn't. I can't speak from that perspective.
I've told you that, so I give you
Rob
permission.
has said this
It doesn't. You're
before.
right.
Marriage is not the magic wand to
Yeah.
overcoming loneliness.
And I also think that, like, if you are thinking that marriage will solve it, then you're putting that pressure on someone else to be something that they're not meant to be, that is only the place of Jesus. And
Totally.
so that's unfair and a responsibility someone else wasn't meant to carry. So, I feel like, I mean, I spent like much of my high school years and college years chasing after relationships that weren't honoring because I felt like I was lonely and that this would solve it. And I have to tell you, like, it was a chase that wears you out like nothing else. And we're going to talk more about dating and everything later in the series also. But I say this to say that, like, it is much better to remain single, and Paul says this, to remain single and pursuing the Lord and having him become what you need in your loneliness and whatever it is that you're struggling with, than to enter into a relationship that God is not in the midst of. So if you are like thinking that dating someone or marrying someone because you want them to fix your loneliness, you're gonna like both end up frustrated because that just wasn't the way that it was meant to be. I think that we can overcome it by creating genuine relationships in our community here at Sanctuary.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the nugget right
Yeah.
there. Is genuine relationships can still be formed. Like, you can be known and know people
Yeah.
regardless of relationship status. I think that's important to mention.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a closing thought in just a moment because I want you to think about this. My closing thought will be, how can the church do a better job at loving single people? But I just want to wrap it up with some things that you're mentioning, because I think it's important to know that the church was actually the first institution, if you will. Before it was even an institution, it was a group of believers. And that Paul writing what he wrote there was so countercultural and unheard of in antiquity. Like, the church was the first place to recognize singleness as a viable way of life.
Wow.
And that Caesar Augustus, who was a ruler at the time, was actually handing out fines to women who didn't get married. And if their husband passed away or if they were divorced, they would be fined if they didn't marry within 2 years of that.
Wow.
And Paul is saying,
Talk about pressure.
Yeah, right? Talk about pressure. Like, you will be fined by your government. Like, so a
No
lot of
pressure.
even what we experience today and the freedom that you have to even be single right now started with this letter that we're talking about that happened a couple thousand years ago to a group of believers. And it's cool to see how that impacted the world. But Paul, again, he mentioned it as a gift. And he's saying, hey, first of all, the body of believers is going to cover you. If you're called to singleness for life, we're actually going to cover those fines, which was crazy.
Yeah.
And additionally, he's saying, because the church is not a building you go to, but a body of believers you belong to, you can be known. We are going to make sure that our community here is a place where we're going to combat loneliness in our church. And that's one of the things that we desire to do with that core value of we get close.
Yeah.
We want to make sure we're doing that as best as possible, recognizing that, hey, you got to put yourself out there. Like,
it takes risk.
It takes risk on both ends. And we can't come in with this like feeling like, oh, you guys just need to reach out to me. It's like, oh, reach out to people too. But anyway, I want to close with that, but with the question, how can we, and I'm not just talking about Sanctuary, because we're a young adult community. Honestly, like 80% of our people are single.
Yeah.
Not including like, legal designation, but which would bump those numbers up even more.
Yeah.
But how about the church as a whole? Like Christian culture, how can we love single people better?
Yeah.
One sentence, go.
One sentence. Maybe like 3.
3, fine.
I feel like as a church, the Big C Church, we do a great job of celebrating marriage. And we all come together. We throw this big party. It's a huge deal. So much money is put into it. And I think that if we as a church celebrate the wins in our single friends' lives just as much, and make a big deal out of the moments when a single friend opens up their home and hosts a small group out of their house, or gives of themselves in that way, or when a single friend goes way out of their way to help someone in need. Like, make a big deal out of these things and celebrate the wins
Love that.
so that, as singles, we can feel valued and know our worth and our purpose right now.
That is beautiful. I have our producer, Zach, looking at me like you are way over. So I'm going to close with a quick... He's like, no, I'm not. Yeah, you are. I love you, Zach. It's okay. Zach is a great guy.
Woo, give it up for Zach. Thanks,
sets
Zach.
us up every week, edits it. I'm grateful for him. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a quick prayer for anybody that is viewing this or listening to this, and it's this. May God release contentment wherever you are right now. May you be where your feet are planted and find that the Holy Spirit is with you in that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.